What happens when a man walks into court with cameras flashing expecting to be publicly humiliated? And instead the judge asks one question that freezes his powerful father, kills his brother's smirk, and turns their lawyer paper white on the spot. Some families don't need knives to make you bleed, they use reputation, money, and influence to turn the truth into a spectacle, then force the victim to bow like they were the problem all along. Americans have a saying, the truth will out. But is the truth something you speak to save yourself, or something you keep to survive? If you were holding a secret big enough to shatter the people who raised you, would you stay silent one more time or make them pay today? Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now let's listen to his story. When the taxi dropped me 2 blocks away from the courthouse, I stayed seated for a moment. Hands still breath measured. It wasn't fear in the way most people think of fear. It was calculation, the kind that tells you to walk instead of being dropped at the front to control what they get to capture. I stepped out. The air in downtown Atlanta had that crisp bite you get in early winter, the kind that wakes up nerves you didn't know you had. The moment I rounded the corner, it hit me, the clatter of cameras, the stab of questions from behind velvet ropes and tripods. Mr. Hollowell, did you burn through $2.4 million of your brother's money? Is Aegis Gridworks a shell company? Are you dodging creditors with a fake DOE contract? I didn't flinch, I didn't slow, I didn't give them the soundbite they came for. Not today. The courthouse loomed ahead like a coliseum, federal, cold, dignified in its pretense of neutrality. Inside, the scent hit first leather-binding old wood perfume that cost more than a month's rent, and the sterile bitterness of fresh printed court documents. In the marble lobby, people mingled like they were early to a charity gala. They weren't here for justice. They were here for blood. Danny Castillo, my attorney, met me inside without a word. She didn't do small talk. She didn't smile. She wheeled in 2 black crates of files herself. No paralegals, no pomp. That alone said it all. We weren't here to beg. We came armed, then came them. My father, Claiborne Hollowell, had that same genteel composure that made him the darling of every Rotary Club in Milton and every energy board from Savannah to D.C. He nodded politely at a passing security guard who almost looked honored to scan him. My mother, Maris, wore a black wool dress like mourning was a full-time job. She clutched a silk handkerchief she hadn't used yet but would right on cue. My brother, Rhett, was immaculate as always. Trimmed beard, pocket square that matched his socks. He wasn't nervous, he was savoring it. The man who once texted me family first was smirking like he was already toasting my funeral. And then there was their mouthpiece, Sutton Pruitt. Theater kid turned courtroom showman. His tailored suit practically winked under the lights, and his voice was already warmed up like a man about to open a play. It hit me then, they didn't come to win. They came to cement the image, to frame me before a single word was said. This wasn't about the case, it was about control, reputation, perception. They didn't need the truth. They needed a headline. The legal basis, a petition for involuntary bankruptcy. The weapon, a debt of $2.4 million, fabricated, exaggerated, or misrepresented, it didn't matter. If the judge bought the premise, it would trigger automatic reviews of my contracts, particularly the high-security ones with the Department of Energy. It was a strategic hit. All they had to do was convince the court I was financially unstable, that I had defrauded my own family. If that label stuck even temporarily, it would tank everything I'd built. Not just Aegis Gridworks. My ability to operate, to be trusted, to even walk into certain rooms. This wasn't just a civil claim, it was a controlled demolition of my life. But they didn't know what I had. What I'd buried so deep for 8 years it became part of my marrow. The thing I built when I disappeared. The way I restructured every public trace of my name. The firewall I embedded between myself and anyone who shared my blood. If they triggered the wrong clause, the fallout wouldn't be a scandal. It would be federal. Still, I didn't breathe easy. Because secrets only matter if you play them at the right time. And in a room built to manipulate silence, timing is everything. Danny pulled me aside before we entered the courtroom. She looked me straight in the eye and said in a low voice, "They didn't just file a lawsuit. They wrote a narrative. One meant to bury you. I looked past her. Rhett was laughing at something Sutton had said. Hands in his pockets relaxed. He caught my eye, and that smirk didn't even twitch. As I pushed open the heavy doors into the courtroom, it didn't feel like walking into a hearing. It felt like walking toward a firing squad. And I had one shot. Let the judge ask the right question, and the whole thing would collapse. I barely noticed the marble benches filled with suits, heels, pearls, faces I half recognized from boardrooms, charity galas, and Christmas cards we never meant to send. Friends of the Hollowells, colleagues, observers, gossip feeders. They weren't here to support, they were here to witness. Sutton rose like he was taking a Broadway stage. He didn't open a file. He didn't cite a statute. He just started telling a story. Your Honor, he began, voice smooth as silk. Today is not about vengeance. It's about responsibility. He painted me as a reckless son driven by ego, seduced by Silicon Valley dreams, prone to risky ventures under the illusion of genius. He said I begged Rhett, my dependable older brother, for $2.4 million to bail out a startup I couldn't manage. That within 6 months the money was gone. That I'd refused to account for it, claiming I had government contracts that somehow justified the loss. And now I was dodging repayment by hiding behind legal smokescreens. It was a performance, and my family perfectly cast. Maris dabbed her eyes with that silk handkerchief at just the right moments. Claiborne sat as still as marble, the picture of dignified disappointment. Rhett. He smiled gently like he pitied me. Sutton didn't just want repayment. He wanted blood. He requested the court recognize the debt as valid. He requested the corporate veil be pierced so my personal and business assets were fair game. He requested that a trustee be appointed to assume control of Aegis Gridworks in the interest of protecting creditors. I wanted to speak. God, I wanted to stand up and yell, there was no transfer. There was no wire. You're lying. But Danny placed her hand lightly on my wrist. Not yet. They want you emotional, she had warned me. Because if you lose composure, they win the headline, Hollowell's son melts down in court. And no one reads past that. So I sat, stone-faced. Because in a room full of actors, silence was my best weapon. Then Danny stood, and the tone shifted. She didn't argue the narrative. She dismantled the foundation. If there was a $2.4 million loan, she began, where is the bank trail? If there was a legitimate investment agreement, we should see notarized documents, routing numbers, signatures, dates, independent witnesses. If Aegis is a shell company, then why does it have delivery logs and independent audit trails from third-party vendors, including correspondence with federal agencies? She rolled over the first cart. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. Dozens of binders inside. Evidence. No stories. No tears. Paper. And that's when Sutton faltered. Danny opened one of their exhibits, alleged proof of a wire transfer. There's a discrepancy in the routing ID, she said calmly. It doesn't match the originating bank. She flipped to a timeline. And the date of this supposed transfer, it doesn't correspond to any recorded capital injection in the company's history. The courtroom didn't gasp, but the energy shifted. Sutton looked to Rhett. Rhett's smile thinned. Claiborne shifted slightly in his seat, just enough for me to notice. The cracks weren't wide, but they were there. And I began to see something that made my chest tighten in a different way. This wasn't about getting back money. This wasn't even about destroying my name. This was a cover. A performance hiding something far more volatile. Something they couldn't afford to let anyone find. I leaned back in my chair, heartbeat steady. Maybe they thought I was still the kid who'd run from a family name. They forgot what I'd been building all these years. They forgot I know how to wait. And they forgot I don't swing unless I know exactly where to hit. The moment we stepped out of that courtroom, the city of Atlanta felt colder than it should have been. Maybe it was the wind slicing down from the glass towers overhead, or maybe it was just the chill of knowing the people who raised me had signed and sealed a death sentence on my name wrapped in family smiles and notarized lies. Danny walked beside me in silence, her face unreadable, but I could feel the gears turning in her head. We didn't speak until we reached her office, where the windows were tinted against the world and the war room was already humming with quiet intensity. 13 bankers' boxes sat stacked like sandbags in the corner. Evidence, facts, paper wounds. Judge Corinne Halbrook had said little before recessing, but the tone in her voice had shifted. She was no longer listening like an outsider to a domestic tragedy. She was now reading like a prosecutor about to discover the rot. "Did you see her hand?" I asked Danny as we sat down. She nodded. Your mother froze for just a second. That second was enough. Because when Danny laid the signed agreement on the table in front of Judge Halbrook earlier that day, she hadn't just challenged the content of the contract, they'd challenged its very bones. The seal of notarization sat on the bottom corner like a quiet landmine. And the name embossed in that seal, Maris Hollowell. My mother. It was embossed cleanly, dated properly, indexed against a notary number that matched her old licensing records. It was either real, meaning she'd knowingly helped legalize a document designed to dismantle my life, or it was forged with tools only a family insider would have access to. Either way, their story broke. Victims don't notarize weapons, not against their own children. I'd watched my father lower his eyes as if someone had shut the lights inside his skull. I'd watched Rhett's smile waver for the first time since this circus began. Sutton Pruitt, their mouthpiece, had started rifling through his folders with the sudden panic of a man who realized his act was leaking from the seams. But I said nothing. I didn't need to. I'd waited 8 years for this moment. 8 years of silence. 8 years of keeping Aegis off the radar of building contracts with federal agencies under cloak and dagger conditions. 8 years of setting up infrastructure that could withstand storms, cyber attacks, grid collapse, everything but betrayal from my own blood. And now, with one misstep from their side, the stage lights were swinging away from me and toward something else. Something uglier. Something darker than a debt. Danny didn't say much as she sifted through the documents again. Instead, she adjusted the strategy in real time, restructuring the narrative, priming the judge's suspicions. Not with accusations, with patterns. The notary seal alone is enough to raise questions, she murmured. But when paired with the banking anomalies we exposed earlier, they'll say it was an oversight. Or that she didn't understand what she was stamping. She was a compliance officer for over a decade, wasn't she? I nodded. Until she retired the year I disappeared. And now she's weeping on command in federal court. Danny exhaled sharply. I don't think Judge Halbrook will buy it anymore. But Danny wasn't done. She was aiming higher than rebuttals. She was laying track for one decisive moment, the kind that couldn't be spun, sobbed through, or smeared. Let her ask, Danny muttered. Let Halbrook be the one to raise the question. What question? Who benefits if you're discredited? I sat back, chest tight. That question wasn't just legal. It was moral. It cracked through the pretty sheen of family drama and exposed the machinery underneath. They didn't want their money back. They wanted me disarmed. And the moment the judge realized that, the mask would drop. We left Danny's office just after dusk. Atlanta was wearing its evening lights like armor gold reflections off glass traffic weaving through shadows. I drove alone, windows down, thinking about how quickly a courtroom can turn into a crime scene. Not with blood, with silence, with misdirection, with names on dotted lines that were never supposed to be there. I arrived at Aegis headquarters around 8:30 p.m. The security gate recognized my license plate and buzzed me in. I parked in my usual spot but didn't get out right away. The building in front of me had always been a fortress built from grit, designed for resilience. But tonight, it felt like something else. Like a vault that had been cracked open from the inside. Inside, the lights were still on. A few staffers lingered, project managers, engineers, our compliance lead. Familiar faces, all of them. People who'd stayed up nights to meet deadlines. People who'd trusted me enough to follow when I said, keep your heads down. It's not time yet. But someone had talked. Someone had leaked internal deployment code names. Someone had slipped classified phase schedules into the enemy's hand and made forged documents look real. And that someone wasn't outside the building. that someone was here. Earlier at Danny's office, she and her forensic team had laid out everything. Routing inconsistencies, watermarked anomalies, transaction formats that matched my father's company's internal ledger structure, a system I hadn't had access to in almost a decade. It was too precise to be random, too clean to be desperate. And worse, the forged files included a term, Stage Delta Huron Node Sync, that had only appeared in an internal memo between my engineering team and a DOE contact 6 months ago. It was never shared, never printed, never emailed. The only way it could have appeared in the legal documents was if someone on my team gave it to them. That was when Danny said it flat out. "You've got a rat." I stared at the list of names again, dozens of them all tied to Aegis at various levels. And then my eyes stopped on one. Calder Knox, mid-30s, joined 6 months ago from a private contractor in Alpharetta. Sharp, well-spoken, handled project timelines and internal comms. Too clean, too quick, too confident. But I couldn't accuse him not yet. If I moved too soon, I'd lose the one chance I had to prove not just forgery, but espionage. So I made a plan. I wrote a memo, an internal-only document marked strictly confidential, do not share. In it, I listed a fictitious deployment update, a midnight relocation of hardware assets to a test facility in Macon. Something just believable enough to tempt a leak. Then I waited. I walked through the halls that night like a man with sand in his shoes, every step weighted with the knowledge that someone I'd hired, mentored, maybe even had dinner with, was betting against me. Back in my office, I locked the door, sat at my desk, and stared at my own reflection in the glass. They didn't sue me to get their money back. They sued me to shut down my contracts, to trigger clauses that would halt funding, to force a receivership, to make my silence permanent, not because I owed them anything, but because I was the only thing standing between them and whatever they wanted behind that curtain. And now I was going to let them take one more step. Because the next email they send, the next whisper they deliver will be the one that ends them. All I have to do is sit still and wait for the sound of the trap snapping shut. I called it a briefing, but I knew exactly what it was. A trap. The glass-walled conference room at Aegis shimmered under the morning light, and one by one my leadership team filed in 6 of them. Danny told me to act calm, act distracted. But it wasn't an act. My stomach was in knots. Every person at that table had been handpicked by me, trusted by me. And now I had to look at them the way you look at a room after someone's been poisoned, wondering who held the vial. Calder Knox walked in last. Always a beat late, always scanning. I let out a slow breath and started the briefing. "Court's pressing. If this drags out and the judge approves a freeze, we may have to move quickly," I said, voice low, tired. I left the shadows under my eyes uncorrected on purpose. That includes server racks, code backup, sensitive equipment. No one spoke. I continued. "I've prepped a contingency relocation plan. Out of state, Chattanooga, possibly Huntsville." That did it. Heads turned. Calder tilted his head slightly like a dog catching a whistle. "But we don't send this over email," I added. "No Slack, no texting. This is tight-lipped. I've printed physical copies with the addresses. 1 per person. Destroy after review." They nodded. Calder didn't. He raised his hand slightly. "Is this legal, moving digital assets across state lines mid-proceeding?" I kept my gaze flat. Nothing's being moved yet. It's just contingency planning. But he was already looking down at the paper, fixated on the address like he needed to memorize it. I marked the time, 9:41 a.m. The meeting ended at 10:06. Most of the team dispersed through the front hall. Calder didn't. I watched from behind the glass wall as he took a call in the parking lot. Not near his car, not near the building. Out in the open, pacing. He thought I couldn't see. But he wasn't watching the reflection in the glass. By noon the next day, Danny's voice cut through the speaker on my phone like a blade. They filed for a TRO. My heart thudded. Based on what she didn't even pause, They claim you're trying to offload or relocate digital assets across state lines. They submitted a sworn statement citing intelligence that assets were moving to Chattanooga. I sat down. Hard. That address wasn't in a single database, wasn't on a single hard drive. It existed only on that slip of paper and in my voice during the meeting. They bit, Danny said. We've got them sourcing internal info illegally. I exhaled. They didn't even wait. Exactly. Their emergency filing is now our exhibit, but that wasn't the end. That night my phone rang again. A different tone. An unfamiliar number. Mr. Vance. The voice was clipped suspicious. This is Paul Hinton with Marcona Utilities. We received a court notice this morning about a federal trustee being assigned to Aegis. The sender included a request to grant admin credential access root level for site verification. What email address he read it out. It was close. Clean. Looked official. But the signature line gave it away. Trustee designate, Office of Infrastructure Oversight. No such office existed. I stood heart-pounding. Do not click anything. Do not respond. Lockdown system access now. I called Danny before I could breathe. They're spoofing the court. They're targeting clients. Her voice turned lethal. Send me the headers, all of them. My brain was doing loops. This wasn't just legal anymore. This was infiltration. They didn't want money. They wanted collapse. And they wanted it fast. The next morning I walked into Aegis like nothing had happened. Calder was already at his desk. Calm, typing, smiling at the interns. I dropped a folder onto my own desk with a thud that echoed louder than it should have. Inside was the forged email. In black and white now, I told Danny over the line. And it's going to court. She paused for a long second. Then good. Print that. And don't just bring it. Slam it. I didn't answer right away. I was still watching Calder through the glass. He looked up. He didn't smile. Camera flashes started the moment I stepped onto the courthouse steps. The first time this happened, I'd flinched, wished for vanishing powder. But not today. Today I walked through the chaos like a man carrying something breakable because I was. And what they'd tried to break wasn't just me, but my company, my people. Rhett stood near the door, hands in his pockets, playing casual. My father was schmoozing someone in a tan suit. My mother wore gray, her eyes glossy again. I didn't look at them. Danny met me inside the lobby, jaw set. No contact, eyes forward. We're not giving them a damn second. The courtroom felt colder this time. Not by degrees, by intent. Sutton rose first. Same script. Like nothing had changed. Your Honor, we reiterate our petition. The respondent has misused company funds, owes $2.4 million to family creditors, and is attempting to relocate key assets to avoid judicial oversight. No one interrupted him. Danny folded her hands in her lap. Let him talk, she'd said. Let them walk into the buzzsaw on their own feet. Then Judge Halbrook looked up from the case file and turned to me. Mr. Vance, she said, voice clean, deliberate. Is Aegis Gridworks currently operating under contract for any project monitored or regulated under federal infrastructure oversight? I didn't blink. Yes, Your Honor. Just like that, the room shifted. My father froze. Sutton opened his mouth, then shut it again. Rhett's chair creaked as he leaned forward, the blood draining from his face. Halbrook closed the folder in front of her. Then let me ask this again, she said now to Sutton. Are you petitioning this court to seize operational influence over a federal infrastructure contractor based on a private family dispute? Sutton's voice cracked. We're merely seeking restitution that would trigger a freeze, she cut in, on a regulated project's operations. He stammered, tried to redirect. We had no knowledge, she cut him off again. Then you petitioned in ignorance, or you petitioned recklessly. Either way, the implications are now different. Danny stood calm as a surgeon. Your Honor, if I may, I have exhibits. She handed the first set to the clerk. Inside, routing numbers that didn't check out, mismatched signatures, and a notarization stamp registered to Maris Hollowell, expired for 3 years. My mother gasped. Soft. But the kind of sound you don't make unless you recognize the stamp. She tried to correct. It was an old stamp I didn't realize too late. Danny continued. Furthermore, we have an email. The judge raised an eyebrow. This was sent to a client of Mr. Vance's company. It impersonates a federal trustee, requests sensitive system credentials, references a location we now confirm was fabricated by Mr. Vance as part of an internal information leak test. She handed that over too. The judge took her time reading. Her jaw tensed as her finger paused on the phrase Chattanooga relocation. Then she looked up. You made this up, she asked me directly. I did, I replied. It was never real. It was bait. And they used it. I nodded. In a sworn statement, and in a fraudulent attempt to deceive our client. Silence fell. No air, just stillness. Clerk Judge Halbrook said, voice suddenly sharp. Seal the room. No one in or out. The bailiff moved faster than I expected. Halbrook turned back, expression changed. This is no longer a simple bankruptcy matter. This is a pending evidentiary hearing involving fraud, forgery, impersonation of a federal officer, and potential interference in federally monitored infrastructure operations. I didn't move. My father stared at me like he'd never seen me before. And maybe he hadn't, because this time I hadn't just survived. I'd pulled the trigger, and the shot was still ringing. The war room in Danny's office was lit by nothing but the glow of red pins and laser focus. No one slept. No one joked. The timeline we'd pinned across 2 whiteboards had grown teeth because every string we pulled now led back to someone I trusted. Everything converges here, Danny said, tapping the triangle-shaped section she'd drawn, 3 columns forged, documents, leaked information, and motive. But we can't use emotion in court. We need clean links. We need one undeniable source. She handed me a checklist. Server access logs, security camera footage, badge swipe data. I knew what she wanted, digital footprints to back what we'd started piecing together, an inside leak, and I had a name in mind. At 1:43 a.m. I was inside Aegis HQ in the restricted hallway near our secure printers. I set up 4 near-identical paper packets, internal draft updates with subtle differences, a hidden watermark string in each, a slight typo in one paragraph, a misplaced decimal point in another. Each folder went to one person. Hand-delivered. Signed for. One of them was Calder Knox. If any of this shows up in opposing counsel's filings, I told Danny, we'll know exactly who sold us out. Let's not just catch him, she said. Let's catch the one who placed him here. The next afternoon, Danny called me in. She didn't smile. They used your typo, she said. The one in Calder's copy. She slid her laptop around. The attached exhibit from the opposing counsel's latest motion had the exact same misplaced decimal and watermark string baked into the document metadata. On top of that, the print time matched Calder's badge swipe into the secure hall. I didn't feel rage. Not at first. Just this hollow ache. Calder had been with us since almost the beginning, his resume clean, his demeanor calm, his loyalty a performance. He hadn't just betrayed a business. He'd chipped at something I had rebuilt from blood. I gave him a chance, I muttered. He was never meant to be one of them. We didn't confront him with yelling or threats. Danny said no. No texts, no leaks. We follow protocol. This becomes admissible. We're not playing petty. We're going to win clean. So we staged a meeting, HR company counsel and a forensic analyst present. We invited Calder to explain his unusual login patterns. He cracked halfway through. The moment we brought up the badge logs, he started losing color. He hadn't applied to Aegis through the normal route. He was recommended by someone in finance. Someone from Milton. Danny looked up. That's your father's circle. That changed everything. Calder wasn't just a leak, he was planted. Someone greased the wheels to get him inside before we even knew there'd be a war. That night I got a text from my father. Sit down with me. No lawyers. Let's end this before you make it worse. I met him halfway at a dark parking garage near West Ponce. He stepped out of his SUV like nothing was burning, like our family name wasn't on the edge of public collapse. "I know what you're holding," he said. "You don't have to drag that through the mud. We can still fix this." He didn't mention money. He talked about legacy, about what a name means, about the things sons shouldn't expose. And right then I knew the truth. They feared that document more than losing the case. 8 years ago, I left Milton after a night that blew the lid off everything I thought I knew. I packed one thing in the glove box of my truck, one thing I swore never to use unless they tried to destroy me, a notarized file, something that would crumble the public image they curated. I disappeared. Changed the company name. Hid ownership. Buried myself in concrete and infrastructure because if I looked back, I'd fall apart. Now I had to unlock that vault. Before dawn, I sat across from a woman I hadn't seen in years, Sherry Lane, my father's former operations manager. She'd reached out after seeing the court coverage and hearing a name she never thought would resurface. She handed Danny a folder. "I was told to delete this file 8 years ago. I didn't. Something felt off. I thought, maybe one day he'd need it." Inside was a breakdown of asset transfers, one routed through a shell company, the other tied to my original inheritance paperwork. There were signatures. There were timestamps. And there was Rhett's name in an approval box. He'd known. We finally had the thread. My secret no longer stood alone. That evening, Danny looked me dead in the eyes. "If you put this into evidence," she said, "it becomes public, irreversible. Are you ready for that?" I nodded. Not out of revenge, out of necessity. They already crossed the line. Now they face what they built. I walked into the courthouse with a dozen cameras flashing in my face. No one asked me questions. They didn't need to. They already thought they knew. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid. Across the lobby, I saw my father, Rhett, and Sutton. They held their postures like statues, like nothing could touch them. That was about to change. Judge Corinne Halbrook entered with the same quiet authority as always, but this time she didn't start with motions or debts. She looked directly at my father. "Mr. Vance," she said, "have you ever authorized or concealed legal or ownership documents, specifically ones that if made public would disqualify your family's standing in this lawsuit?" Silence. 1 second. 2. My father froze. Rhett's smile vanished. Sutton's hands curled on the table. The room didn't breathe. Danny rose. "Your Honor, we request to introduce a sealed exhibit," she said. "Some contents relate to critical infrastructure and may require privacy protection, but the material directly addresses the case's integrity." Judge Halbrook allowed it with conditions. The room shifted. Reporters perked up. Danny built it methodically. Forged notaries proof the alleged debt paperwork was modified after the fact. The watermark leak, undeniable digital fingerprint linking Calder to internal breach. Impersonated trustee emails sent to clients proving malicious manipulation. By the time she reached point 3, the courtroom was already crumbling. Judge Halbrook rejected the family's motion for a trustee. She ordered an immediate evidence preservation protocol. Then she issued subpoenas. One for Calder, one for Rhett, one for any financial communications linked to shell companies based in Milton. Then came the exhibit I'd held for 8 years. Danny laid it flat. A legal transfer of ownership, sealed, notarized, misfiled through a backdoor entity. My father's signature, Rhett's approval, and the proof that they had stripped me of legal standing to a family trust before I even left town. I didn't say much. I just confirmed what it was. I've kept this off the grid, not for leverage, for protection. The courtroom shifted again. Danny turned to the judge. This lawsuit was not filed in good faith. It was filed to suppress this document, to stop it from ever seeing light. They didn't want $2.4 million. They wanted silence. My father tried to interject, but his voice cracked, caught between denial and realization. Rhett lowered his eyes. Not out of shame, out of calculation. The numbers had stopped working in his favor. Judge Halbrook's ruling came in waves: motion denied, trustee petition denied, full record preservation ordered, referral to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation initiated, courtroom closed session initiated for infrastructure data integrity. We didn't cheer when we left. There were no champagne bottles, No victory speeches. I stepped out onto the courthouse steps feeling like something heavy had been cut loose. Not one, just finally released. I didn't look back. From now on, everything came through legal channels. No phone calls, no family dinners, no more second chances. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a bang. Sometimes it comes in a single question at the exact right moment and a truth that waited long enough to outlive the lies. Some truths don't need to be shouted or weaponized, they just need to be brought into the light at the right moment. I didn't reveal the past to hurt anyone. I did it because others had already started paying the price, their careers, reputations, even their safety, because I stayed silent for too long. And when justice spoke with just one question, I realized it's not always the loudest scream that breaks someone, but the quiet force of truth delivered with clarity. I used to think I needed acknowledgement, maybe even an apology, but I've come to understand real worth isn't in being recognized. It's in not losing yourself just because others tried to erase you. In the end, what's worth keeping isn't a family that refuses to face what they did, but the version of me who stepped into the dark and brought the truth to light. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook, it's about no longer letting them hold power over your pain. Some stories don't end with a clean victory or a dramatic apology. Sometimes they end quietly with a weight lifted, a truth spoken, and a man walking out of a courtroom not to celebrate, but to finally breathe. What we just heard wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming the right to stand in your own name without fear, without shame. And maybe that's one of the hardest things in life, choosing to carry your truth with dignity even when it would have been easier to bury it. We all carry something, some weight, some wound, some memory we never said out loud. And there comes a time when staying silent costs more than speaking up. That's when courage doesn't look like a fight. It looks like a deep breath, a closed door, a quiet enough. It's in those moments we remember justice isn't always about proving others wrong. Sometimes it's about proving to yourself that you never needed to disappear just to be safe. If any part of this story resonated with you and you feel like leaving a few words, we'll be here reading. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, feel free to subscribe and join us. We're building something quiet but strong here. Until next time, take care of yourself and we'll meet again soon.